Hello, my name is Neha and you're watching this video on the Pratyancha channel. Today I shall discuss with you a piece by poet W.B. Yeats, and the poem is entitled Among School Children. We shall discuss the piece stanza by stanza, line by line, to decipher the philosophy inherent in its words, and also to answer the question that why is it that we find the piece so esoteric? What is so mysterious about the things that Yeats has tried to discuss in this poetry? Let's discuss Among School Children by W.B. Yeats. Among School Children by W.B. Yeats is a poem that deals with origin, with transformation, with the aim of life, and the idea of retrospection. That when confronted with this thought that why do we grow old? What happens when we are young? What are the dreams that we then dream? What is the creation that we then do? And then how do we transform in the course of this life? And towards what end? These are the kind of things that seem to be going through the poet's mind as he writes this poem, Among School Children. W.B. Yeats is writing this poem in the late 1920s, and he's a Nobel Prize winner. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature in the year 1923, and this poem is considered as an epitome of his creative prowess. And also the poem, like I said, is a culmination of the ideas that he acquired through his life, and a questioning that if I have acquired these ideas, have I acquired them right? Have I acquired them in a way that they orient me now to make sense of it all? So both the notions are inherent in the poem. Yes, it's an understanding, a comprehension, like I said, a culmination of what one acquires as knowledge through one's life, but also a questioning that have I acquired enough, or do I know enough, or do I know as much as is required for me to be able to address the question that what is the truth of this existence? Why do we create? Why do we labor so much? And what happens when our creations get a life of their own? So we'll try and discuss all these issues as we go through the poem stanza by stanza. In the first stanza, the poet says, I walked through the long schoolroom questioning. A kind old nun in white hood replies. The children learn to cipher and to sing, to study reading books and history, to cut and sew, be neat in everything. In the best modern way, the children's eyes in momentary wonder stare upon a 60-year-old smiling public man. It's evident here, he says, a 60-year-old smiling public man. So the poet is visiting the school when he's about 60 years old, and he holds public office. Perhaps he's in the local administration, or he's a minister, and by virtue of this authority, he is called upon and he goes and meets the school children. So he's walking through the school corridors and or the long school room, as he says, and he's questioning. He's talking to the nun. Maybe it's a convent, or it is a convent where he's gone, and he's talking to the nun who takes care of the children, who teaches the children, and she's answering his questions. The school is where the children learn to cipher. Cipher means a sign. So they are being taught language, the alphabet, ABC, or whatever languages, other languages the children are studying. So they are taught to cipher. They're also taught to sing. They study books there, they study history there, and they also study how to cut and to sew. So there are other kinds of training that the school imparts as well, apart from the subjects in the classroom. And they are taught to be neat. So certain manners the school imparts the children. And in the best modern way, the upbringing is being given to the children. They are being nurtured in the best modern way, and the children's eyes are full of wonder. You go back to a time when some important person came to your school, and you will be able to remember that everyone was looking upon this man with a sense of wonder in their eyes. Maybe a wonder resulting out of curiosity, maybe because you wanted to grow up and be like them, or maybe because they had a persona that attracted that sort of attention. But when we are in school and suddenly we are all huddled together, taken to the main auditorium or to the playground outside, which is now converted into this lecture space for the person who's come in. We're looking up to this person who comes into that space. And this is how the poet says that the children have wonder in their eyes as they are looking up to me. So in the first stanza, the poet sets the stage for all the thoughts that will now go through his head, and then he will tell us about these thoughts in the coming stanzas. The stage is set, as in there's a school, he's been invited to the school perhaps to meet or lecture the students, and he's among them, he's among the nuns who teach the children, who take care of the children. And now the poet will tell us what is it that crosses his mind as he is in this situation. Let's look at stanza number 2. I dream of a Lethean body bent above a sinking fire, a tale that she told of harsh reproof or trivial event that changed some childish day to tragedy. Told, and it seemed that our two natures blend into a sphere from youthful sympathy, or else to alter Plato's parable into the yolk and white of one shell. The poet starts to think of his beloved, of a woman who was exquisitely beautiful in her youth and still is. And he starts to think of the time when they were kids, and he remembers a story that she told her, that in her childhood there was a day when she was scolded or upbraided for some mistake that she had committed. She had done something which had incurred the wrath of the teacher or the parent, and it had turned a childhood day to tragedy. So she had told the story to the poet, that there was a day in my life when such an incident had happened. And that time both of them were really young. So usually when you're very young, you're moved by these stories that, oh my God, my beloved or my friend has had a difficult event in their past. They're coming to terms with it, trying to come to terms with it in telling me of this particular incident in their lives. And this youthful sympathy makes you fall more in love with each other, or gives you this idea that perhaps you need to give a shoulder to cry on to the other person. And in that sense, both of them emotionally, sentimentally feel closer to each other. And he says that, I would say, like the philosopher Plato, he spoke about the egg, and in that the yolk and the white of one egg. It seemed like the two of us related to each other in that moment when she told me the story of her childhood where she had been scolded. The way the both of us related to each other was almost like the egg yolk and the egg white, they mix within the shell. So we became one. We could really identify with each other, the pain that she had gone through and the fact that she was seeking this support in me, and I was forthcoming with that support. So we were tied together with youthful sympathy. Now he's taken to this thought because he imagines that yes, I was also young once, I was also a child once, and perhaps he's thinking of the times when they were teenagers, perhaps it's younger than that, or perhaps they're adults already. That is not clarified in the stanza, but the fact that the poet's thoughts in being among school children are traveling to a time when he was young with someone whom he loved, and how they had this little exchange of that person telling him of an incident in her past which wasn't a very wonderful memory, and the poet giving that person his support. In the third stanza, the poet says, and thinking of that fit of grief or rage, I look upon one child or the other there, and wonder if she stood so at that age, for even daughters of the swan can share something of every paddler's heritage, and had that colour upon cheek or hair, and thereupon my heart is driven wild, she stands before me as a living child. In this stanza, there is a reference to Greek mythology. The reference was already there in the second stanza. I didn't broach it there because I thought while we discuss the third stanza, both these references can be understood together. So here the poet starts by saying that, thinking of that fit of grief or rage. So I do not know if my beloved told me about that harsh incident, whether she was grieving or whether she was angry that this had happened, but it was a fit. She was possessed by the thought of that unpleasant memory, and she had told me about this incident. And the moment I start to think of that incident, I start to look at every child in the room, imagining that she would have been of this age once, that she would have been a little child herself once. And maybe she inherited this beautiful visage that she had, the features that she had from her ancestors, and I suddenly start to feel, my heart begins to race, that she stands before me as a living child. He starts to feel that as if the beloved here is present at that age when she was a child in front of him. Now there is a soft sort of an emotion attached to the realization that the person whom we love was once a child. We find joy in looking at their childhood pictures. We find joy in getting to know of some sort of mannerisms they possessed when they were a child, or a chocolate that they liked. And this is what he's saying here, that my heart begins to race. She stands before me as a living child. So now coming to why he uses the term swan. In stanza number 2, he had said Ledian body. Now Leda is this princess in Greek mythology who goes on to become a Spartan queen, and she's considered to be of great beauty. And there is a story, a mythological story, that Zeus forced himself upon her, and he took the form of a swan and he forced himself upon her, and finally they had children. So here he says that I'm thinking of my beloved as someone who had that Ledian beauty. She looked like that princess in mythology. She was as beautiful as that princess, and he takes that mythological reference forward in saying that if a swan had fathered the children out of a Ledian beauty, then the children would inherit the traits from the parents, and therefore he says that daughters of the swan can share something of every paddler's heritage. So she had inherited this beauty, like Leda and Zeus had given birth to the children who were then of course their offspring, so had inherited their beauty or their physical characteristics from the parents. Now why does he use this reference, or why is it that he had to only give the metaphor of the beauty of his beloved with reference to this story of Leda and Zeus? Well, that is a choice that the poet makes, and in the second stanza he tells us that his beloved was as beautiful as this mythological princess. In the third stanza he tells us that now I'm thinking that where did she get her looks from, and if she's a Ledian beauty, then she also inherited it from her ancestors, like the children of Leda and Zeus inherited it from them. In the picture you can see that Zeus has taken the form of the swan, and he is forcing himself upon Leda, or the princess. Now he goes on, and till this particular stanza, the poem seems to follow a certain sequence. The fourth stanza also relates to the fact that he's been thinking of this event in the beloved's past, the fact that she told him of this event at a later date, and the fact that perhaps she was also a child sometime, and being among school children, he can imagine what was she like, a little girl. Now in the fourth stanza he says that now as my thoughts are progressing, her present form comes to my mind. Her present image floats into the mind. Did Quattrocento finger fashion it, hollow of cheek, as though it drank the wind and took a mess of shadows for its meat? And I, though never of Ledian kind, had pretty plumage once, enough of that. Better to smile on all that smile and show there is a comfortable kind of old scarecrow. Her present image floats into the mind. I think of her, that how she looks like now, and I can't help thinking that she's so beautiful that it looks like a Renaissance painter or a sculptor fashioned her, made her, created her. Quattrocento is the initial phase of the movement called Renaissance in Europe, and during that movement a lot of painters and sculptors acquired fame because of the art that they produced. So we know very famous painters from that era, and he feels that she indeed was fashioned by nothing less than a Renaissance artist. So he asks a question that she's so beautiful that I don't think she could be born of a mother. That looks like an artist, a painter, a sculptor fashioned her, made her. So did Quattrocento finger fashion it, hollow of cheek, as if it drank the wind? You know, the hollow of the cheek is so beautiful on the image that he has of her now. Why does he say the hollow of the cheek? This could refer to a dimple, but largely it's referring to someone who has aged, and therefore you see that there is a hollow in the cheek, and it looks like that it drank the wind. So it has aged gracefully in response to the natural elements, and then it's taken a mess of shadows for its meat. If there is a hollow in someone's face, that particular area looks dark. So it looks like the hollow is filled with these shadows, and therefore he says with its meat, and he feels that even that hollow looks so beautiful on her. And then he starts to compare himself with her, and he realizes that I was never so beautiful, and I had pretty plumage once. Plumage is basically the feathers of a bird, and when a bird spreads the feathers, and it's a metaphor used here for saying that there was a time when I too looked very attractive, but I surely wasn't of the Ledian kind. I surely did not have any Greek goddess looks on me or a Greek princess looks on me, and better to smile on all that smile. And I think I will just give a smile to myself, thinking of how I looked then and how I look now, and I just should accept it that I look this comfortable kind of scarecrow now. Comfortable kind, I have a kind demeanor, I'm a nice person, so it's not like I have grown into a human being who's not very acceptable or who has manners which are not very nice. I'm a comfortable person to be with, but I'm an old scarecrow. Now what's a scarecrow? Farmers, to ward off crows from their corn or from their the crops that they're growing in their farms, they put up a bamboo pole, and then they have this body made of hay or some kind of material. They put clothes on it, they put a hat, so it looks like a man is standing in the expanse of the field, and therefore the birds don't come and eat the crop. So he says, I'm that kind of a scarecrow. So basically he is hinting here that he has aged, but at this age he doesn't look at all attractive. Like, he feels his beloved still does look very attractive, and he remembers that though yes, I had pretty plumage once, I was a handsome young man once, but now I must say that I look like a scarecrow. It's a joke that he cracks at the expense of self, and it's self-deprecating, and he says that but I'm comfortable, so my manners are good, my manners are amicable, but I look like a scarecrow. Okay, so what have we seen in the last 4 stanzas? That he's among school children. He gets to know that they learn to read, write, cook, sew, learn good manners, and then also the fact that he starts to think of his beloved, and he starts to think of himself at a young age. His heart begins to race when he realizes that perhaps she stands before him as a living child, as he imagines that she would have been this young once, and then he remembers that she is beautiful at this age as well, so beautiful that he feels that a Renaissance painter or artist had made her, but he hasn't aged that well in terms of physical beauty, though he's a good old man. So this is the flow of the poem till this stanza. Now let's look at the 5th stanza. What youthful mother a shape upon her lap, honey of generation, had betrayed, and that must sleep, shriek, struggle to escape as recollection or the drug decide. Would think her son, did she but she see that shape, with 60 or more winters on its head, a compensation for the pang of his birth or the uncertainty of his setting forth. In the 5th stanza, for the first time he broaches the aspects which I feel are the theme of the poem, that is of origin, of creation, of transformation, and of understanding why do we do what do we do. So he speaks of mothers here for the first time, and he says there's a youthful mother, there is a shape upon her lap, she has given birth to a boy or a girl, and the baby is upon her lap. And again there is a reference to a mythological story by way of which a belief is propounded that if you consume a certain kind of honey, then you lose your prenatal memory. So basically, when a child is born, he or she loses the memory of all that had happened to it before it was born. So there is a notion here of reincarnation. There is a notion here of continuity of life beyond death, and therefore we are not limited to this lifespan that we have, but perhaps we go on and become another life after we are dead. So the poet here is referring to the fact that this shape upon her lap, this baby, honey of generation had betrayed. So basically the baby was given this drug that again, like I said, it's mythological. The baby is not being fed honey in the normal course of giving honey to someone to eat or to consume, but in the sense that there is a process that takes place by way of which human beings at birth lose the memory of all that has gone before. Now, this baby can shriek, can basically cry, make a noise, it can struggle. It is struggling to escape, or it can even sleep through. It may not struggle at all, that if I have to forget, let me just forget everything. Or it can struggle. It can struggle to escape recollection, as recollection or the drug decide. So what is it struggling against? Perhaps the mind of the baby is trying to remember every memory that it has stored before the time of the birth, but then because it has been administered this mythological drug, that drug is ensuring that the baby forgets everything that came before. So the baby tries to sleep through it, tries to cry through it, or tries to struggle, but then it's a battle between recollection and the drug, and the baby starts to perhaps forget whatever has happened in the moment, in the life before this moment of its birth. Now he again goes back to the reference to the mother in the next line, and he says, this youthful mother, what did she think when she saw this baby on her lap? Did she think that this baby one day would be 60 years old? Of course, it's a reference to the poet himself. And then did she see that whatever life my baby leads in all these 60 years would absolutely be worth the pain that I felt when the baby was being born, the pang of his birth? Birth is a very painful process for the mother, and would she think that whatever happens in my child's life, whatever he or she achieves, is going to be worth the pain that I went through to create this child? Or was she worried about the uncertainty of the child setting forth on a path of its own? So there are two choices before the mother that the poet puts forth. He says that either the mother could have been possibly thinking that whatever my baby shall do in the next 60 years of its life, are they going to be worth the pain that I felt when I gave birth to the baby? Or was she uncertain? Was she filled with insecurity when she thought that the baby would have to chart a life on its own, and there could be many hurdles, there could be many obstacles, many problems, challenges, tragedies? How would he or she overcome them? What was she thinking when this baby was thrown upon her lap, and the baby herself or himself is struggling to retain the recollection of the past life, but the mysterious drug which is administered by nature is making the baby forget all that had gone before? A question arises that Yeats was speaking of his beloved, about him being a child, and now he suddenly turns his thoughts to mothers and babies. Why is it that he does that? Now, I want you to remember that he posits the concept of mother here as a creator. He posits creation as a painful process, and he also posits that the creation, the baby that is born, will have a destiny of its own, and the creator, the mother, may not have total control, or can never have total control over what unfolds in the life of something that she has created. And he will take this metaphor further. With this, we have come to the end of part 1 of this poem, Among School Children by W.B. Yeats. We shall continue the discussion in part 2, and then we shall conclude the poem in that video. Thank you for watching.